which is further articulated as people having a responsibility, indeed an obligation, to take part and to make progress. We need to work with people to design a government system that will ensure that they want to do that. A shift away from the control culture in government is needed to make that happen. Control is an anathema to the creativity and innovation needed from public servants to get true transformation. We obviously need to work within the laws and the parameters set by any of our governments, but we also need to give our people room to create real local solutions. Importantly, public servants have to accept that they don't always know best, or they don't even know it all, and should go out and actively seek ideas and input. Most importantly, they need to take time to make sure that they ask the right questions. You can identify this kind of thing called a virtuous cycle here. Co-design should enable us to offer better quality services, which in turn will generate better user experience with those services. Through co-design techniques, we can then use these experiences to further improve the quality and repeat this kind of cycle. The virtuous cycle should also help to influence policy and will build trust in government and overcome some of the reluctance that certain individuals and groups in the community feel toward engaging with government agencies. If people can see that public servants are genuinely listening to their views and acting on what they say, they'll be much more inclined to take up opportunities to participate. They'll begin to see that their ideas matter. Now, finally, I want to say, I think it's important, as Christiane suggested, to have a more analytical approach to service delivery. And I think in future that we'll see a greater focus on systems thinking and collaborative policy and program designs. As part of this, we need to understand the overall impact of complexity and the fragmentation of services and requirements of citizens. We need to use communities of interest across public service agencies involved in service delivery, focusing on the intersections, how to better join up services and share our innovations. A more sophisticated set of data is necessary to build a picture of what matters to people. The active use of evaluation and prototyping to test different approaches to engagement and service coordination so that we've got an informed understanding of what works and what doesn't, and greater mobility between the public sector and the community sector as ways of increasing our mutual understanding. If these steps are taken, there'll be scope to make sure that change keeps happening. Co-design is, in my view, iterative, but in time, it's transformative as this sea of initiatives across the country will coalesce and, in my view, crystallise into major change. In conclusion, let me just say that I think there is an enormous appetite in this country for these sorts of changes, as is evident from the number of people that we've seen here, or we have here today at this conference. A majority of Australian public servants are very keen to be creative, to be innovative, and to work collaboratively across the system so that they can deliver better outcomes for the people they serve. And while they are sometimes frustrated by systemic constraints that they experience in working with government agencies, my sense is really that everybody is champing at the bit to take the justifiable risks to make all of this happen.
Thank you, Lynelle. I was sure Lynelle would speak her mind, and she hasn't disappointed. While you're thinking of a question, let me kick off with a question to Lynelle, because I'm sure Peter Thompson would have. You talked earlier about gauging your staff for what they thought the reforms were, and you got a lot of positive input from that. You talked about comments coming from the front line and your service delivery people, but how much actual input did you get from clients themselves? How did you gain that input? Did that input all add up together, or were there different tensions in that input?
we should never forget that some of this work is iterative. And one of the key drivers to develop the whole service delivery vision was the feedback from our staff about what the customers were saying to them. In other words, they were being told that the services just weren't delivering what needed to be delivered for them. So that's the first comment I'd make. But the actual process we undertook was, and we are intent on doing this about every 6 months, a series of forums across the country, and we have within the organisation from Centrelink a bunch of people who are experts in running community forums, and they led this work for us. And I think we had 25 or so of these nationwide, might have been 29, something like that. And they involved people from the poorest people to the richest people, to the average working person who has very little to do with the organisation, to people with children with disabilities, to people who are child support payers and child support recipients, and so on and so forth.
Okay, now I've got a question right down the very end. Yes. So speak up. Yep.
Alan Asher, the Commonwealth Ombudsman, and Lynelle, I think your work both at Medicare and subsequently is some really world-leading work on co-design and development of those programs. I'm wondering though, if you can tell us a bit about the challenges that you have faced and are still facing in the language problem, the complexity of the correspondence and multiple letters and all of that, and just how you see that as being transformed.
Yeah, Alan, I know this will drive you crazy, but I feel a little bit that the way the public service is quite risk-averse, and the reason it's risk-averse is that it feels that every decision it takes might be legally challenged, so it has to do everything in quite a bureaucratic way to cover all of its bases. That leads you to something that says process, and more process is the only right answer. I think that's rubbish. And I really do feel that as we go forward, we will increasingly be engaging with people only when we have to. We know that if we send them advices about increases in their pension payments, for example, they just ring up because they want to understand it. It's an engagement that doesn't need to occur. We can just increase their pension payments and get on with it, and so can they. In other cases, we need to be quite explicit about what we're doing and why, and people absolutely need to understand their legal obligations. It's that kind of sense of judgment that needs to be brought into play, and there is active engagement within our organisation between the people at the front line and the people who are devising our integrated programs and services as to how to make that a reality.
Right down the front here.
I should also say that I basically think government shouldn't bother people unless they have to.
I'd agree with that. My name's Lindy McAdam. I'm from the Department for Families and Communities in South Australia, and I'm really interested in how we can link this whole concept of co-design for service delivery across spheres of government. One of my areas of responsibility is state government concessions, and of course that's reliant on Commonwealth gatekeeper cards. I often hear from our clients that why can't they get their state government entitlements at the same time as they receive their Commonwealth government entitlements. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on what the chances are of achieving that sort of co-design of services across spheres of government, and what your thoughts are on how we can make that kind of thing actually happen.
And have you got bets of fears as well?
My thoughts on that are is that that's absolutely part of the thinking about where we want to go in the future. In fact, the Australian government's blueprint for reform on the public service says specifically that. At this stage, we're trying to avoid running before we can walk, And within our own organisation, I think people might think on the outside it's easy to combine 550 officers. It ain't, you know, it really isn't. And if you stuff it up at these early stages, then you can ruin the whole basis of your transformation, and governments just balk and staff balk and you get nowhere. So we're trying to get, in the first instance, our own house in order. But despite that, people are already at our door saying, can we work with you on that? We're doing some work, as I said, with the local government or the Municipal Association of Victoria in the co-design territory. There's other work going on that I can't talk about publicly with some of the other state governments. So if states want to talk to us about this, we are open for business. And, you know, the whole approach here is working effectively with others to get a better outcome for people.
Next question. Was someone here, was it?
I'm going to finish under time, John.
No, we're not. Well, I asked about Vets Affairs. Are you moving there? This is a 30-year debate.
Already we have picked up the ICT infrastructure for the Veterans Affairs Department, and it's that kind of partnership role where people come to us and talk to us about what might work best for them. We will do that. But we have taken the view that we are not going to impose ourselves on others. We don't think that's appropriate. Instead, we want to work with others in partnership so that we can get good outcomes all round.
Still time for questions? Sure. Yes, here at the back.
Peter Baldwin from Department of State Development. I guess just a follow-up question.
Where is it?
Yeah. From the, similar to the one from the lady from South Australia. I guess my experience with disabled children sort of drives this a little bit. And I know that when I've had to go to places, it's usually been to state and to local government support and to NGOs support. And I guess, you know, you answered a little bit your response that you want to walk before you can run. But I guess it's important that there's mechanisms to make sure that the people working for you are aware of those range of state and other organisational support mechanisms as a first step, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's a very good comment. And sometimes we're not. More often than not, though, at the local level we are. And that is really where we see this progressively going. We've considered at various stages whether we should have national data stores of support services that are involved, and in time we may well get to that, but there are always issues about whether they're comprehensive, whether services have come or gone or whatnot. We see our local people as the key to working with state and local government organisations as well as community groups. But one of the reasons we designed this concept of the service leader was specifically to be a key reference point across the country for those important stakeholder groups, in particular state government groups. We've got 16 service leaders and they're geographically spread across the country. Yeah.
My name's May Lamb and I work for Jobs Australia. We're an organisation that's a National Association of Non-Profits delivering employment and training services, and we take a particular interest in the design of the employment services system. I'm very interested, based on what you've reported to us today, to hear about what you think the design and implementation of compliance and sanctions policies would look like if you were to take account of your frontline staff's experiences of delivering that. And I'm also interested in how you see the interaction of the delivery of integrated services working in view of a competitive contracting to a variety of providers in employment services areas.
Okay. I take the view that as public servants we administer the policies as